Hello, everyone. Welcome to the keynote session entitled Libraries as Catalysts for an Open Future. I'm pleased to welcome two outstanding open access advocates, Heather Joseph and Vanessa Proudman. They will tell us about the role of the library in initiating activities aimed at striving for open future and open science. Heather Joseph is the SPARC Executive Director since 2005. Under her stewardship, SPARC has become widely recognized as the leading international force for effective open access policies and practices. Heather regularly participates in committees and collaborates with projects with U.S. federal agencies. She has worked on initiatives and consultations to promote the open sharing of research outputs at the United Nations, the World Bank, UNESCO, and World Health Organization. Through SPARC's global network of affiliates in Europe, Asia, and Africa, she is an active collaborator on projects that support community-developed and controlled solutions for knowledge sharing. Her community service includes terms of the board of directors of non-profit organizations that support the open sharing of knowledge. Prior to joining SPARC, Heather spent 15 years as a publishing executive in both commercial and non-profit organizations. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Vanessa Proudman is the Director of SPARC Europe, where she is working to make open the default in Europe. Vanessa has 20 years international experience working with many leading university libraries worldwide from over 20 countries. She has focused on supporting research on open access, open science, open culture, and open education, and above all, on facilitating improved access to Europe's decentralized research results. She has done this through international and national policymaking, advocacy, and knowledge exchange. Prior to SPARC Europe, Vanessa was program manager at Europeana, but returned to her passion to support researchers and educators in the dissemination of knowledge. Vanessa is driven by change. She is a keen connector and collaborator and strongly believes in contributing to the public good through her work. So welcome both of our speakers. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And I will ask Heather to start your common presentation. Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you to the organizers for the kind invitation to Vanessa and myself to participate today. We're looking forward to a lively conversation with each other and with you all. We thought that we would do a slightly different format for a keynote, and rather than running through a presentation of a slide deck, we have set this hour up as a conversation between Vanessa and myself as executive directors of library organizations, Vanessa in Europe and myself in North America. And we have organized the discussion or our conversation today around highlighting 4 key challenges, specifically to the library community in building bridges to the open future that we envision. And we'll focus, I think, out of necessity on many of the differences in our approaches that are driven by local and regional needs. But we always want to keep in mind the common purpose that we are sort of united by in driving our visions forward. And we thought an interesting way to start, or I'll credit Vanessa fully for the idea of opening the talk, we thought it would be more interesting to start by each choosing independently an image that we felt represented our ultimate vision of what future is it that we're trying to build? What does it look like? And we each picked one. Neither one of us has seen what the other, what image the other has selected. So Anna is going to start off by putting the image that I selected up first, and I'm just going to give a minute or two on what it represents in terms of my vision and the vision of SPARC from a North American perspective about an open future, and then Vanessa will do the same for her image, and then we'll launch into a discussion of the common areas. And I chose this vision or this image, honestly, because ultimately the vision that we're striving for at SPARC really reflects the fundamental principle that being able to share knowledge is a human right. And our vision really is a world where everyone can contribute to and benefit from sharing knowledge. So I really liked this image, which is sort of simple but huge, reflecting that our challenges are global and on a systems level, but they need to not just center technology, but center humans in our strategies and solutions. And my vision for building this kind of future really does center the right of all people to participate equitably in a knowledge sharing system. A system, we like to say, that's both open by default, but also intentionally equitable by design. So this is the image that I chose. And Vanessa, I'm curious to see yours next.
Oh, Vanessa, you are muted.
Muted, Vanessa.
It always happens, doesn't it? You've done so many presentations. So firstly, Heather, I just really love your image. And I really love the focus on that it really centers on humans, because I think the biggest challenge for us is the human aspect, the cultural change, the researchers seeing the value that place in the research assessment system. So the human is really, the humans are the ones who are going to create the change, the vision that we want. So I really love that in particular. And also that it's a human right, and that equity is really central. I think many have kind of lost the sense of that importance, and now I think it's our responsibility with many others to make sure that equity really is central to our mission. So now I'm going to go to my picture, which is really different. Anna. So this is the future that I really hope that we will have. It's a really open and diverse, really healthy ecosystem. It's community-led, it's connected, innovative, and sustainable. It's really healthy. Where open is the default, but not at all costs. It's a really diverse landscape. You can see so many flowers, trees, different regions working together, thriving off each other. And that all, I think this is a national park, and whenever I see a picture from Switzerland, it's a breath of fresh air. I mean, I hope you agree. But, you know, when I think this is probably a national park, and if it's a national park, then you kind of feel you want to be part of it and that it's yours. And I think the vision of open an open ecosystem and open where research is openly shared, that's something that you want to be part of, and that we all enjoy the fruits of research and education, like we can wander through these fields in the national park through the flowers, and where we really have a more equitable publishing system, which we don't have yet, but there is a lot of activity going on, and we just need to balance things, I think, better. And also, how do we make sure that this beautiful landscape stays so picturesque and healthy? We need to work the land together. I think what we need to do, so we need governments, we need funders, institutions and service providers, librarians and the researchers, working on principles together to make sure that it stays healthy and accessible to all, and that we don't have any of those walled gardens, that everybody does have access. And of course, there will always be mountains. So you see the mountains on the horizons. There will be maybe some of those research-intensive universities with heaps of capacity and resources, and they may be able to go and trek those mountains and get access to some knowledge. But we want other others to kind of have access to the majority. And I think what we also need to do with this landscape to make sure that it stays healthy is we need to ensure, so whilst working the land, that the nutrients are not exhausted by one particular output. So, for example, if we think of the library budgets being very overly exhausted when purchasing those journal article deals. So how do we make sure that we can really tend the whole land rather than parts? And then I'd like to just end the sun here, because of course we need the sun for this to thrive. The sun is the research assessment system that really needs to change, because without that, all of our efforts over the last 20 years, we're still going to be treading water and still not reaching the 100% or the closer to 100% that many countries are striving for. So we really need to balance the quantitative and the qualitative ways that we evaluate research, and really put open, make sure that open has an important place in that when we assess research. So I just love this picture, and I would love to be part of making this a reality for an open future. So I think I'm going to go on now, starting off a discussion about some of the things that are close to our heart, which are, I think, still really challenging to make that a reality. And I think you can turn off the picture and just have us both on screen, if that's okay. So I think I'd like to, so of course we're talking from two different perspectives. So me for Europe, if you like, today, and Heather focus on North America. So firstly, the context. So how do you implement this wonderful open future? So the policy framework that supports our work is so essential, and libraries have really influenced the policy development over the years, and we still can influence it. And I think it's really important that, we continue with policy development across the world to support our work. So just very quickly, if we think of Europe, though, the UN Europe is 44 countries, and the EU Europe is 27 countries. So how on earth do you set policy for such a huge region? If you think about the huge diversity in the size of those countries, the languages that they speak, cultures, political compasses being different, the research and education environments and the legislations that also differ, and then, of course, the open science policies, let alone the diversity in libraries that you think of, from one-person libraries to research-intensive libraries with innovation departments. So, with that context in mind, it's a bit of a feat to see, well, how do we develop open science policy in Europe? And librarians, for almost 20 years, they were really the first to truly speak out for open with the Berlin Declaration. But it's really, we really need to acknowledge it's the research funders who've really accelerated and amplified our voices. And we have so much to thank the European Commission for. So the European Commission, with billions of euros going into research, the biggest research funder in Europe, in 2012, they started really, they kicked things off with their recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information. And we helped feed into that, as did libraries. So they really started to encourage their grantees to publicly share their research results back in 2012. And of course, the interest there and their role, their important role, is to have a more of a unified Europe. So connect Europe, the knowledge of Europe, the European research area. So who better to set an important policy and to help align those member states. So that was back in 2012. A lot has happened since then, and thanks to them in part. At last count, we have 18 countries in Europe with a national policy. So national policies are also important aside from the research funder policies. And then you've got nations like France with a revised one, which came out last week, with very specific, commendable points of action, expectations for implementing policy, really thinking about how to make a success of open. And then also putting a budget to match it to make it possible. So there are some really exciting developments on national policy levels in Europe. And libraries have also, developed and influenced those policies. I'm also really excited about the intergovernmental policy development. So with UNESCO, if you look at the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation, which is out for draft to be reviewed by its member states, it really puts, as Heather said, human rights at the center, and academic freedom, the benefit for the public good, equity, fairness, diversity. We haven't seen this hardly in any of the other policies. This is so important, and of course, with such a broad and diverse membership, of course, it speaks to them. It also speaks to Indigenous peoples for one of the first time. So that's really important. And there are other interesting developments like in the EUA, European University Association and their strategies, Science Europe, the Research Funder strategies, G7 and their Open Access Working Group, and that mandate going forward. So there's lots of exciting developments. Institutions, the EUA just came out with looking at their universities and their policies. We have 54% of universities being reported as having an open science policy in Europe, so still a way to go. But to implement those national policies and those UNESCO recommendations, we really need the institutions also to have policies, because they're the ones closest to the researchers who are taking the action. And just going back to the funders, we also surveyed the funders in Europe, 2019. We saw that 2/3 of them had an open access policy and 1/3 had an open science one. And funders, of course, they have much more of a bargaining power when trying to change the scholarly publishing system. And I think with looking at Coalition S, they have done a lot to raise awareness of the issue, to call for immediate OA. Their rights retention strategy is extremely promising for the future, I think, for our researchers, and to make their work more openly available and openly licensed. They also seek to increase and maintain quality in open science, which is what we want. They're promoting transformative agreements, but also repositories. And also they have an OA Diamond task force as a result of a study that we were part of. But it's up to us as institutions and libraries to implement some of those policies. I think what's missing, though, is we really need to boost and promote more diversity. So, for example, in OA Books and OA Diamond. And then I'm going to end just with a couple short things. I think what we really need now, because there are so many fantastic initiatives across Europe where research funders are talking to each other in Coalition S or at Science Europe. You've got national funders talking to each other, national governments and open science policymakers talking together at CONOSC, the EUA, amongst universities, but they're not talking together and seeing how to monitor those policies and looking at how they can build their policies to make them future fit going forward. And libraries can also be part of that conversation as well. So I think that's really important, that we bring those voices together, that we are more aligned amongst the different stakeholder groups. And then for libraries, I think something that's really missing is we really need to feed into the development of European legislation that really enables open science. So we've seen in Europe the Open Data Directive, the Copyright Directive, so seeking alignment across member states. We now have the Digital Services Act and the Data Act, and we need to make sure that those acts support the work that we have been doing. So the rector of the University of Amsterdam, she has been talking about a Knowledge Act. So where we really remove some of those national barriers to knowledge sharing. And also we, together with other actors like LIBA and others representing libraries in Europe, with these other legislations, we've always called for exclusion of the academic community from some big requirements, which would just be very burdensome. So what we actually need, instead of all these exclusions, we need to have an act that really enables and protects the path to open knowledge, and that we really have a better a knowledge ecosystem that is supported by legislation. And it's really important that libraries also engage with us, so SPARC Europe, LIBA and others who speak on your behalves, to make sure that this act, which we think is coming later on this year, will really serve our needs. So you can take action as well, and help us move this forward. I'm going to stop there. I'm sure I've gone over time, but over to you, Heather.
It's okay. It's hard not to interrupt. I want to stop and ask questions about a whole bunch of different things. But Vanessa, I wanted to start just by reacting to the ecosystem, the nature of the picture that you put up, and I think the synergy of thinking about access to knowledge as a human right and centering it in the systems level and the ecosystems level is exactly where our challenges are. And I think the policy environment that you just described in Europe reflects that our challenges really are on a global systems level, that obviously need addressing from national perspectives, but finding ways to harmonize and support policies that move our community towards these open futures on a global level are critically important. So I'm particularly grateful to you for raising the UNESCO consultation and the recommendations that provide the framing that we need, I think, on a multinational level to really have targets and frameworks to use to harmonize national policies on an international basis, right? To reflect the fact that we're not going to get a global human right or a thriving, healthy research communication ecosystem on a global level without this consistent policy harmonization. I kind of wanted to break it in the middle of your conversation and express how difficult it can be that policy change moves in different regions in different countries at different paces. And in the U.S., certainly, we've had our share of challenges in moving things forward over the last 4 years. We've recently had a change in presidential administrations, which has presented us with, I think, some really important opportunities and challenges that complement the work that's happening in Europe. And I did want to just make sure, you and I talk about this all the time about where the work that happens in Europe. Right now, we point to the fact that Europe is, quote unquote, ahead in policy development on open science. And I think that's reality, and it spurs the sort of competitive juices of policymakers that don't want to be left behind in creating policies that can solve pressing societal and public issues in the policy environment. Really am pleased that right now we have an administration who's come in with a focus on scientific integrity and essentially restoring the public's trust in science. So while you won't hear conversations or discussions right now explicitly about an open science policy as the lead, it certainly is a large component, right? Transparency, introducing accountability, all of the benefits that openness introduces into the system are definitely elements that are in play with our new administration. And that also, as we mentioned in the beginning, Vanessa and I had 4 points that we wanted to make sure to touch on in terms of challenges. Policy is the first, but the second, I think, feeds sort of naturally out of the policy environment. And here in the U.S., the conversations as they have, as we've seen them also do in the UNESCO environment on open science, have really centered the need to be intentional about introducing equity into the environment and into the ecosystem. The idea of equity is central to the current Biden administration's priorities across the board, not just in science policy, but across the board in the US. It's definitely central in science. And when we're talking about equity, we're not talking about policies that are designed to treat everyone the same, right? Those would be policies that focus on equality, but rather equity, it focuses on meeting people where they are and acknowledging that they need different things in order to be put on equal footing, on a level playing field, if you will, in the environment where we share and benefit from exchanging knowledge. And the idea of equity is not new in the open access movement. And Vanessa, it's interesting to me that you note the Berlin meeting as sort of the beginning in Europe. In the US, we, I think, used the Budapest meeting, which was a year earlier, as the sort of touchstone for the beginning of the open movement writ large. And certainly the idea of equity was centered in the Budapest Declaration, which talks specifically about opening up access to scientific and scholarly information in order to not just accelerate discovery, but democratize education, share the learning of rich regions with poor regions, and vice versa, really creating situations where that vision of everyone being able to benefit from contributing to and accessing knowledge is centered. And certainly libraries understand the importance of intentionally centering equity in the strategies that we're promoting. It really helps us, I think, as a library community to think about that equity component and how it comes into play or doesn't come into play when we're thinking about the kinds of policies that we want to support and advocate for and the kinds of initiatives that we want to promote. We just ask ourselves, we use it as a lens to ask ourselves as individual libraries and as a library community, does this solution actively contribute not just towards an open system of sharing knowledge, but one in which equity is centered, right, where everyone truly can participate. So this idea that we use and are increasingly using to think about equity is really this notion of openness as an enabling strategy in service of building an equitable system of sharing knowledge. And Vanessa, I'm really curious to hear your reactions to that.
Well, there was something, I'm not on mute. There was something really interesting that you said about meeting people where they are. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think that is quite a big challenge, because if we think about meeting those where they are, particularly the researchers in a research assessment system that's not necessarily yet embracing open as it might. How do you envisage meeting those people? So if they're not there yet, where we'd like them to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two ways to think about meeting people where they are. One, in an equity perspective, is that not all people have access to the same kinds of resources.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So it is more, coming from that perspective. But
yes, I get you.
As incentives is our third big challenge that we wanted to talk about, right? So assessment is this is the what is our budget for research communication worldwide? Something like a $10 billion question, right? That we need to solve. How do we change that and do it in the places that are meaningful to
Yes.
researchers. And what role can libraries realistically and actively play in that? I think is critically important.
Right. So, I mean, so of course, I absolutely agree with you. I would like to touch on how can we as libraries make a more equitable open access system or ecosystem where, as you say, everyone can participate. So I think libraries are very well placed to really build a community-led open future. And for example, if you think of the OA Diamond publishing system, so we're lucky to be part of a study funded by Science Europe and commissioned by Coalition S. So to look at the OA Diamond publishing system, and there are many universities that own these OA Diamond journals. We estimate there are about 30,000 across the world. They're relatively small, and they produce roughly the same amount of articles as APC-based journals do. So this is a really huge community, which and these are really scholar-led journals, right? Very small, funded by universities mainly. Some of them even housed at within libraries or university presses. They're also, so of course, being free for the reader and for the author, that, you know, allows more to participate, which is really what we want to see more. And also there are so many, they're 38% more multilingual than APC-based ones. So it's really important, the importance of language. So we would really like to see those communities being further developed, capacity being further built, connecting those very small publishers together to create an alternative system so that more can participate in a more equitable system. And then furthermore, we also got together with other colleagues with the Open Access Books Network. So Coalition S had already described in their original principles that books would have their own pathway. Well, we felt that we would like to bring the voices of very different actors, so publishers, researchers, libraries, service providers, infrastructures together to talk about what could a really workable open access book policy look like? What are the elements? And we saw, again, because of the diversity I talked about in Europe, there is also a huge diversity in the OA books community and market. So with various national and regional backgrounds, so with different languages and cultures, OA policies, funding mechanisms for publishing, different publishing traditions in those countries and book markets. And then, of course, disciplines have also deal with open access books in their own way. There are also a whole plethora of publication types and formats, even within the OA book spectrum. And that also influences on what the requirements are for cost transparency, or peer review procedures, or even the preferred open licensing. So it's really quite challenging to find or develop a policy that works for OA books, an international one. But what we feel is what's important is to bring the diverse voices of those communities, the different actors, to discuss what's important when thinking about developing a policy that works. So those are two things I think that are really important for libraries to engage and bring those actors together to discuss policies that will work. I'm not saying it's easy. We've seen that. But I think that's really important for us to inform policymakers through community engagement. And then I'd just like to also add a couple of other things on how to encourage more equity and open I think we need to promote open source and discourage the use of closed platforms so that we can build that interconnected and sustainable open ecosystem. So I'd like to discourage those knowledge bubbles that we have within countries or, between certain countries. And so really promote more open systems for a more level playing field. So I think I'm going to stop there because I've always got too much to say and too little time. I think we're going to move on to our next topic. I think it's over to you, isn't it, Heather? And
that's fine. I did want to just comment on, Vanessa, the importance of the elements that you were describing are all elements of, these are the things that we need to focus on in terms of meeting people where they live in terms of equity, right? The concentration always on English as the first language, right? That's an element that does not meet people where they live, right? So it's kind of that phrase is a soft phrase, but it's an important phrase to use as a lens, whether we're evaluating elements of policies or elements of the programs or initiatives that we're looking to support in the library community. In terms of this, we talk all the time at SPARC, internally in our team, about it's great to say that we care and want to prioritize equity, but what does it look like to actually do that?
Right.
What you just described are all the different elements that we look at and don't just evaluate to say, does it get us to open, right? Mm-hmm. Does it achieve Budapest or Berlin, but does it also achieve the definition of equity, right? Where everyone has equal footing. It puts people on equal footing to be able to either access knowledge or contribute their voices in an equitable way to knowledge, which I think is really important. And I think you were the lead on incentives, by the way, here. So.
Oh, was I? Okay, sorry. So, well, I mean...
You're getting a glimpse in how we work together on a daily basis. It's you.
This is an experiment after all, so thank you for being with us. So it's just going back to perhaps to my slide with that lovely sunny slide of the future. Without the sun, we can't have that, thriving field of so many flowers blooming. And so what is the role of libraries in supporting cultural change, for this open future? So, and when I talk about cultural change, the biggest challenge is the research assessment challenge. And I think what we can do is, as we have for almost 20 years, we continue to, with our experience as open advocates, help facilitate access to our institutions, knowledge assets, and to really make sure that senior management gets data from us and evidence on the downloads, on the use of that research that's in our repositories or elsewhere. So really providing evidence that opening up our knowledge really does have a positive impact on research, innovation, industry, and society. So that's really important. We also need to, through that, make that work more visible but reusable. So also try to work on making that work openly licensed, so that many can build on our work. I think and Edinburgh is doing some amazing work on that front. So really focusing on looking at the whole institutional assets and really getting that work out there and being proud and getting it reused. I think that's something that will play into how we value our research outputs. And then what we can do is we can also encourage open science rewards and incentives, and highlight good practices. So the EUA open access study published, I think, a week or two ago, they said that 34% of the universities don't have any open science elements in research assessment at present, but 56 were planning. So that's actually quite a huge number. So what can libraries do there? I think they can share good practices going on in their institutions, also outside of the institutions. We got together with the European University Association and DORA to come up with and interview some of those good practices and those case studies. And we're still looking for more, because, of course, connecting our senior management with other senior management and players, connecting them with national new research assessment systems under development or already developed, or local institutional ones. That's what they want to hear about. They want to hear about how was it set up? What were the challenges? Where are you? Who were the stakeholders? How did you get things going? So we kind of did some writing up of some of those stories. And I think we really need to share that knowledge. So we as libraries, we can help raise awareness of some of those great things going on, as well as plugging away at the importance of open science and us increasing the impact of our research and the visibility of our institutions and our researchers. So, Heather,
yeah, I think
I'm sure you'd like to add something.
Well, what you said, I think, is the crux of what I was going to say, right? Which is libraries can play a role up to a point, and we can do and should continue to do the education and the provide evidence. But it's really about the messenger that can make a difference in incentives. And libraries, we don't hold a lot of cards or influence in changing research assessment structures or metrics, but we can influence and help position those who do hold the influence to make change faster. And that's really working to make sure that we're contributing to creating opportunities and structures for university leaders and funders to be explicitly focused on the need to realign incentives to support open science. So building that evidence base from the library community is critically important. And then understanding that we can be voices and forces for helping to create the impetus for structures and opportunities for those who hold the influence to influence each other. And some of the strategies that we're working on in the U.S. is to make sure that there's opportunities for those folks to convene at a systems level, at a high level, underneath, for example, our National Academy of Sciences, that's bringing university presidents and funding leaders together to explicitly talk about shared strategies to realign incentives to support open science. Right? That's not a library-driven effort, except in the sense that we help to catalyze that to get started. But once we have those folks on side, and even a handful, they're the champions. And then they're the voices, they're the peer influencers that can then influence their peers at the university leadership level and the funding leader level to really drive change forward. So, I kind of plus one everything that you said, and then also really thinking about there's times when libraries can directly influence with our voice and our presence and the fact that we're libraries, and there's times when we don't have that the clout that we need. But that doesn't mean we stop, right? That doesn't mean we don't have the ability for strategies. So I think our strategies are building off of those kinds of things. And that's certainly the case in the last area that we wanted to highlight, which is, the need for libraries to play an active role in sustaining the healthy ecosystem, right? Catalyzing, as hard as it is sometimes the easy part, but thinking about how to build the resource foundation to have this vision that we each have thrive in the future is I think the really difficult part. And it's where the rubber hits the road with our collections budgets and our desire to also invest in different kinds of infrastructures that will support these open futures.
So Heather, I know in the US you've been having quite a lot of conversations around that topic with IOI, for example, Invest in Open. We're both involved in that. Could you tell me a bit more about that, or?
Sure. I mean, the Invest in Open initiative is it's in some ways the next generation of the SCOSS initiative, Vanessa, that you have been driving, right? Which is the recognition that there's a need for collective investment on a large scale to support not just catalyzing again, but sustaining and the open ecosystem, the open and equitable ecosystem that Vanessa and I have been describing. And I think the Invest in Open initiative is one of those expressions that is trying to look at the reality of the scale that's actually needed to build an investment structure that can make the open future not be an alternative, but be the inevitable shared path that we want to take. And that requires, I think, a couple of changes in thinking. And for libraries in specific, we've already seen libraries making the leaps in the places where it's probably that we can probably have the most influence in terms of resourcing. And that's really rethinking our relationship with content providers and how we spend the resources that we have and how we invest them over the short, medium, and long term. And there's been a movement in the U.S. There's been a particularly strong movement in reevaluating, for example, big deal journal bundles, the expensive commercial packages, with an eye towards thinking about not just I could downsize the package or cancel the package, save a certain amount of money in 1 year, but what would I save over 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 years? And what could I individually think about reinvesting that money in that would potentially be a more direct representation of a supportive gesture to support the system, that the vision that we're trying to move towards. And then additionally, as an individual library go through that exercise, we like the library community in the form of consortia, regional consortia, local consortia, organizations like SPARC are having discussions about if multiple libraries are interested in going down similar paths, what collectively then could that multi-year funding represent? IOI is an attempt to provide some professionalized financial guidance, business planning, support for analysis of how might we think about taking the money that we are wanting to repurpose and reinvest, and in what form might it take? So it's, I think, a resource for the community that's going to be really important in terms of ensuring sustainability or conversations that get us towards that sustainability question.
Yeah, so I think it's a great group of individuals, and also bringing people from around the world to address this global issue.
Global.
And I think what's also really important is for us to have some more insights on what are we talking about. Yeah, so funding the open science ecosystem or open science infrastructure. Many of us, many libraries, our institutions, universities, and others have built infrastructure over the years. It's been funded generously by research funders, but the operations of some of those resources, they're not guaranteed. So I think it's also important for us to think about, so firstly, to know what we're talking about and the costs and the financial health of that. And we looked at the open science infrastructure offering in Europe last year. We saw that the most important sources of income for those infrastructures came from, government funding, from the European Commission, so project funding, but also in-kind contributions. So it's not just, financial picking up the bills, but also in-kind contributing code, contributing knowledge, personnel resources to some of that infrastructure. And then also you've got libraries paying into membership or service fees that sustain some of those infrastructures. So I think I think we still need more. We need to do more to understand the open science infrastructure and which are those critical nodes that we really depend upon. We found that PIDs were really a crucial node in this, but there are many other nodes that many of us depend upon, depending on if you're a publisher or not, or if you etc. And Peter Suber. So we interviewed Peter Suber about open infrastructures, and he also said, well, we should sit down and actually think about what infrastructures are we using, which services are we using, commercial, not commercial, And then, we will twig how dependent are we on some of these? And, are they not for profit? Are they for profit? How are they connected to other things? How financially healthy are they? So I think that's really important that we think about that. And then going forward, I think, so you mentioned SCOS. So SCOS has been going since 2017. And I think when having those conversations about the need to look after our infrastructure and to actually to influence the direction of travel of the infrastructure that we built, I think the next step is, well, okay, who do we need to fund, and how do we do it? And I think SCOS is one pragmatic way to help libraries if they want to pay their way forward or to experiment with this. A number of large library associations around the world, they recommend certain services that need funding. We have DOAJ, Sherpa Romeo, DOAB, PKP, Open Citations, and we're also excited about announcing some new ones soon. But, we recommend to the community, well, we have vetted, there's a laborious application process for those services to tell us about their financial health, about their plans, about their sustainability plans going forward. And so that's also a way, at the cost of an APC or two, you can really make a huge difference if we do this in a collective fashion, right? And as I say, we've helped raise globally 3 million euros, but it's the tip of an iceberg. And we have actually got, at the moment, we've got a survey out because we felt, well, with SCOS now and new initiatives and, is there still a need for SCOS going forward in the next few years or in many years? What does the community think? What should we be funding? So we have a survey out, and I think Agatha is going to put a link in the chat. So we do invite the community to tell us because we want to kind of build the SCOS future together with the community. From preliminary results, we do see that 60% say that SCOS is extremely or very important for open science infrastructure and funding it. And 58% say that they think that SCOS is needed for many years, but that's to be seen. And of course, we need to deliver and do a good job. But, we will be having some focus groups. And if you're interested, please, reach out to us. So we also get some more qualitative data. But I think we need more of these initiatives. There are many interesting collective action initiatives out there. So this is one, but it's just, getting together to see how can we help sustain that ecosystem. So I think now would be a good time for us to go back to those vision slides, because I think we've almost reached the end of our hour. We do like to talk. I think you can see that from this presentation. As
we're waiting for those to go up, Vanessa,
yes.
just wanted to underscore what you were saying in terms of the start that SCOS has made, right? Like it's amazing to me that we can consider $3 million, a drop in the bucket, but that's actually the case. And when we're thinking about when we're working collectively on sustainability solutions, we recognize they have to be at a scale that's big enough to, again, ensure that what we're putting in place isn't treated as an alternative future, but rather treated as the way we do research communication in the 21st century. And yes. One thing that you said, and one of your comments, and I think it was when we were talking about incentives, you talked about the importance of sort of having an evidence base behind
right.
the actions that we're using to propel towards open futures. And I had an experience last week where I was talking with a set of policymakers and university leaders in the US, and I was using the example of what we learned from the COVID crisis and the application of open in COVID to solve COVID as an example of why we needed to drive more aggressively forward in the in having open science be the default for all publicly funded science. And the response that I got back was, has anyone published a review paper on how exactly open contributed to solving the COVID pandemic? And I thought, well, we're still sort of in the middle of doing this, and there's evidence that we can see, but this call for immediately, the question was, show us the direct evidence, right? Anecdotal
right.
is good enough. And I think we know that as the library community, that professionalizing our data gathering it's where we live first and foremost, but it's also a really important aspect of the work that we're doing to get to these futures.
Absolutely. Do you want to go to your slide, the picture at the end, or shall we?
I don't even think we need to put him up. I would just say, again, that vision, the notion of approaching the future as a human-centered, human rights, access to knowledge, sharing knowledge as a human rights issue. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, so sorry, Heather, I sneaked in the second one. I know we said one each. But, so this is, so my last slide is, so, for that wonderful sea of flowers to blossom, we really need those cross-fertilizers, and we need the honeybees.
Pollinators.
To gather the nectar of that open research, right? And to create that honey. And I really see that the libraries and the librarians are those honeybees, right? And if you see the honeycomb here, so the honeycomb and the hexagons that so beautifully fit together, and they're all working together, right? So I think what's really key in going forward is the librarians collaborating a lot more together. They already are. It's funny because also the pattern of the honey on here almost looks like a world map. But the honeycomb, I think that's also a really lovely metaphor for how interconnected a strong ecosystem needs to be. If you see how this all links and fits so well to be able to store and create that honey, I think that's just a lovely metaphor for going forward. And librarians are so essential in realizing this open science ecosystem, as you said, Heather. And it's just been so lovely to talk about this today. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ayatul.
I can't think of a better image to end on. And it's been a pleasure, Vanessa. Thank you.
It really has been a pleasure, Heather. We should do this more often.
Thank you so much, Heather and Vanessa. Thank you very much for this interesting and inspiring discussion. Thank you very much for adding a splendor to our conference. Getting to know different perspectives and findings out that we all face similar problems was certainly very interesting for our participants. It is my pleasure and honor to work with Vanessa as a part of the initiatives carried by SPARC Europe. I also follow SPARC activities in the US, and a lot of things is happening, and we are lucky to have such advocates of openness working for the benefit of the entire scientific community. I encourage all of you to follow the activities of SPARC and SPARC Europe and to get involved. Thank you to all participants. Unfortunately, we cannot see you and meet you in person, but we are very happy that you are here with us virtually. Thank you very, very much for your presence, attention, and I invite you to participate in the next sessions for the next 2 days of the conference. It was my great pleasure to moderate this session, and I wish you all the best and see you all in the future. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Take care. Bye.